Have you ever looked at a simple list and felt like you were missing something? Well, today we're diving into an ancient text that seems to be just that, a straightforward inventory of metals. But what if it's not an inventory at all? What if it's actually a code, hiding the secrets to a kingdom's power, its beliefs, and ultimately, its downfall?
So, our story kicks off in the Book of Mosiah with a ruler, King Noah. Now, this guy built a kingdom that absolutely glittered. It was a place just dripping with precious metals. The text paints this picture of a city that wasn't just rich, but was almost obsessively over the top, a real monument to power, built on the backs of his people through some seriously heavy taxes.
And right here is where our investigation really begins. You see, the list of metals Noah used seems simple enough. But what if I told you that scholars now believe it holds a kind of hidden language, one that tells a much deeper story about technology, symbolism, and spiritual decay? Today, we're going to crack that code.
Okay, so let's start with the evidence, the facts on the ground. The text gives us a very specific list of materials King Noah used to build up his kingdom, everything from his palace right down to the temple. Now, on the surface, sure, it's a flashy display of wealth, but if you look closer, it's more like a blueprint for how he saw the world and, his very important place in it.
And here they are: gold, silver, iron, copper, brass, and then there's this really weird one, Ziff. Now, most of these sound familiar, right? But that last one, Ziff, that's a genuine puzzle. It just pops up in the record, and then, poof, it vanishes. You're going to want to remember that name, because figuring out the mystery of Ziff, well, that's the key to understanding everything else.
All right, let's tackle our first puzzle. The record mentions that Noah's buildings had all this fine work of gold. And you might be thinking, wow, solid gold walls? Solid gold decorations? I mean, that would have been unbelievably expensive, not to mention insanely heavy. So, how in the world did he pull that off? The answer, it turns out, lies in some very clever ancient tech.
It wasn't solid gold. It was more like a gilded veil. Craftsmen back then likely used this amazing technique called depletion gilding. So here's how it worked. They'd mix gold with a cheaper metal, say copper, to create an alloy. They'd hammer that super thin, and then they'd treat the surface with something acidic, like certain plant juices, which would dissolve away the copper on the very top layer, leaving behind this shimmering, pure gold finish. It's brilliant, it's efficient, and it's also a little deceptive.
And this is just such a powerful image, because the metallurgy itself is a perfect metaphor for Noah's entire kingdom. Just like that fine goldwork was really just a thin, beautiful layer hiding a cheaper, baser metal underneath, his whole outward show of piety and grandeur, it was just a pretty surface, hiding some deep inner corruption.
Okay, so let's circle back to that really mysterious metal, Ziff. Honestly, this is the biggest puzzle in the entire list. It's mentioned right alongside gold and silver as this precious material, but today, nobody knows what it actually is. For researchers, Ziff has been the ultimate cold case.
So what was it? I mean, was it some unique element that's just been lost to time, or could it have been something else entirely?
Well, it turns out the clue probably isn't buried in the ground, it's hidden in the language. Many scholars now believe Ziff actually comes from an ancient Hebrew root word, ziv, which means brightness or shining. And that suggests Ziff wasn't a specific element, but a description of a metal, a particularly bright, shiny alloy.
And that leads us to our prime suspect, a metal called Tumbaga. This was a really common gold-copper alloy used all over pre-Columbian America. And guess what? It could be treated with that same depletion gilding process to look exactly like pure gold, but it was way stronger and a whole lot lighter. So if Ziff was Tumbaga, it means this society wasn't just rich, they were smart. They had sophisticated chemical and metallurgical knowledge.
Now, check this out. This Tumbaga theory also helps solve a major practical problem in a related part of the story, the famous gold plates. Researchers have calculated that if those plates were made of solid 24-karat gold, they would have weighed somewhere around 200 pounds. I mean, just imagine trying to carry that, let alone run with it.
But if they were made from Tumbaga, from Ziff, the weight drops to a much more manageable 50 to 60 pounds. Now, this isn't just about making the story more plausible. What it shows us is this fascinating intersection of the divine and some really sophisticated practical engineering. A sacred record designed to be both permanent and portable. How cool is that?
So we've pretty much cracked the code on gold and Ziff. But once you understand that, it kind of changes how you see the other metals on the list too. And there are two in particular, brass and iron,
that also had meanings that are way different from what we think of today.
Yeah, when we read the word brass, we think of, I don't know, a trumpet or maybe a faucet. But in the ancient world, especially in the linguistic world of this text, brass almost always meant bronze. And bronze wasn't just decorative, it was the metal of heroes. It was for armor, for shields, and maybe most importantly, for sacred records that were meant to last for generations. So the plates of brass, they were a symbol of the permanence of truth.
And then there's iron. I mean, today, iron is one of the most common materials on Earth, so why on earth would it be listed as precious? Well, they probably weren't talking about iron for making plows. They were likely talking about highly polished magnetite, or even meteoric iron, which was used to create mirrors. And in the ancient world, these weren't for checking your reflection. They were seen as powerful, mystical objects, tools for priests to see into the spirit world, and maybe to control revelation.
So, let's put all these clues together now. We've seen that every single one of these metals has a practical explanation, but also a much deeper meaning. And the place where those two ideas meet, where they come crashing together, is the sacred forge, the workshop where raw ore was literally transformed into something powerful, both physically and spiritually.
You know, in a lot of ancient cultures, the blacksmith wasn't just a craftsman. He was seen as a kind of magician, a master of the elements. And the act of taking this rough ore, putting it through intense fire, and purging out all the impurities to create a pure, shining metal, that was seen as a direct parallel to the spiritual refinement of the human soul. The forge was the place where you burned off the dross to shape true character.
So every metal had this dual identity. Gold was a gilded surface that symbolized purity. Silver was all about redemption. Brass, which was really bronze, stood for preserving truth. Ziff, that bright, shining alloy, represented external beauty, maybe even vanity. And iron offered mystical vision and strength. This wasn't just a king's treasury. It was a theological statement written in metal.
And this leads us to the final, and I think most powerful takeaway from this whole story. The metallurgical knowledge itself, the ability to create these amazing alloys or polish iron into seer stones, that knowledge was neutral. That same technology could be used to create plates of bronze to preserve scripture for generations, or it could be used to ornament a corrupt tyrant's throne. The real value was never in the metal. It was in the character and the intent of the person who wielded the technology.
And that brings a lesson of the sacred forge right into our world, doesn't it? We are masters of technologies far more powerful than ancient metallurgy. So it's worth asking ourselves, what are we creating with it? Are we forging tools that preserve truth and help refine the human spirit? Or are we just building more gilded thrones? Something to think about. Thanks for digging into this with us.